Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. There was an event in Turkey. I say it was in Turkey because the information I've got about the event is in Turkish language. I got it from a Twitter handle called Bater Tanner. So this Tanner Bater probably is the presenter of this event, as you can see on the screen. Quite a good number of audience. They discussed antinatalism and they discussed core aspects of antinatalism. I'm just going to read out what actually happened. I've collected this information only from the tweets of this Twitter handle, and we know what topics were discussed. So I'm just going to read out those topics. It was a 3-hour event, so quite a comprehensive talk. They discussed gambling argument, the asymmetry argument, consent argument, meaning of life, suicide and philanthropy, radical ideas and the check of reasonability, animal suffering, the cosmic lottery, conflicting moral intuitions, self assessment of well being, and evolutionary psychology. So, looks like a very deep subjects which were discussed, and nice event. I have asked for the recording of the event, or if not recording, at least an official summary of what was discussed. Let us see if we find that out. Dr. Emile P Torres studies extinction. They have written a book on human extinction, a full, very comprehensive work on human extinction, and they are starting a new reading group on these topics, mainly related to extinction. If you want to join the reading group, the email address is philosophytorres@gmail.com. You have to send an email to that email address. The structure of the reading group is going to be that once every 6 weeks, they are going to have a Zoom presentation, and you can join the session and they will cover one paper. You are expected to read that paper beforehand before coming to that session. Non-identity problem is one of the common problems discussed in antinatalist circles and antinatalist philosophy and books. In fact, David Bennett's asymmetry, his claim is, solves non-identity problem. It provides a solution to it. Now, there is a new research seminar happening on 29th of May in the Institute for Framstedt Studier. I think in English it means Institute for Future Studies in Stockholm. That is an online event as well as an in-person. If you want, you can go and join in person as well. It is happening from 10 o'clock to 11:45, I believe, Stockholm time, Swedish time. And there is a registration link. It is a research seminar on the paper, The Requiring/Justifying Solution to the Non-Identity Problem. And what it says, I looked up the abstract, and what it says is that the author says, my solution draws upon the distinction between morally requiring reasons and morally justifying reasons. I argue that the solution explains why it is wrong to create X being the person who would suffer a lot if they are brought into existence in the non-identity problem. So I argue that the solution explains why it is wrong to create that X person and accommodates the procreation asymmetry and avoids antinatalism. So that is interesting to see. As far as we know, antinatalism provides a sure shot solution to non-identity problem, or at least as far as I understand that. And this paper seems to be saying that we can have a solution by avoiding antinatalism. So interesting. I would try and join online. I've already registered, but if you happen to be in Stockholm, you can also go in person to have a look at what's happening there. There is an online event arranged. Antinatalism versus pronatalism. Is depopulation a good thing or a bad thing? It's going to happen on April 15th and my time 2:30 a.m. in the morning on Monday. So I'm not sure if I'd be able to join, but it's an online event. So I'm waiting for the link. Maybe it is recorded and I'll watch. If you happen to attend it, please let me know what happens. This is interesting because looking at the description of this meetup, and the anchor seems to be Victor M, they seem to recognize that birth rates are decreasing, people are having lesser and lesser children. At the same time, the antinatalist movement is growing, but the reasons why people are having lesser children are not the core arguments for antinatalism. The reasons why they're having lesser children are the same reasons people used to have many children in the past, which are the self-serving reasons, the reasons that serve themselves rather than the concern for the being who is going to be born, which is the core argument for antinatalism. And this sort of false contradiction actually is reflected in many pronatalist propagandas. We're going to see Stephen J. Shaw later in this video, who seems to be barking at a wrong tree anyway. And from that perspective, this is very important to distinguish between what's happening in reality in terms of reducing birth rates and the philosophical antinatalism, which is the arguments for antinatalism. So interesting event which is going to happen. Talking about the reasons why people are having lesser children, there was a report published on nerdwallet.com of a survey that they have conducted. I think their sample size was like 2,000 only American people, so this is very much America centric. But it is interesting to know why people are having less children. It mainly revolves around the cost of raising children or cost of having children. So if you look at some of the infographics published here, why some parents don't plan to have more kids. And 54%, I already have as many children as I want to have. So that bracket is completely out of antinatalism anyway. The overall cost of raising another child is too high. That's 22%. The cost of child care is too high. Again, that is more of a, you can say child free, but not antinatalist. My partner and I are unable to have more children, not antinatalist. My partner does not want more children. This could be antinatalist. Your partner might have been convinced of antinatalist arguments. So, not entirely clear what this is. I don't have a partner to have more children with. This is more of not an antinatalist, not even child free, but unplanned childlessness. Another thing which we're going to look at later in the video. I can't afford to take time off from work for parental leave, not antinatalism again. The cost of infertility treatment is too high. So, this is actually the people who want to have children, can't have them, and want to access infertility treatment. So, not antinatalism. The cost of adoption is too high. And this could or could not be antinatalism. Maybe they don't want to create new beings. They are in that way antinatalist and they just want to help existing children through the way of adoption. So, that's only like 6%. And some other reason could be antinatalism, who knows. But overall, there is no clear picture of whether the reasons why people are having are because of antinatalist reasons. So there is place to say that it is not antinatalist reasons why people are not having more children. There's another infographic here, why some Americans without kids don't plan to have them. And it says, I just don't want to have children. That could be child free, that could be antinatalist, that could be anything else. And that's the majority, 44%. So don't know whether it's antinatalist or not. The overall cost of raising child is too high. I don't have a partner to have children. The cost of childcare is too high. Environmental reasons. Now this could involve two parts. One is I don't want to bring a child into this sort of environment because that child is going to suffer. That could be a philanthropic environmental reason. Or I don't want to increase the carbon footprint. I don't want to bring another consumer onto this world, causing a lot of environmental damage or contributing to environmental damage. That could be misanthropic environmental reasons. But again, sort of on the boundary whether it's antinatalism, it is antinatalism or not. Then cost of infertility treatment is too high. The same reason I can't afford to take time off. My partner doesn't want children. The partner could be antinatalist. The cost of adoption, again, the same thing. My partner and I are unable to have children, which is childless, and some other reasons. So pretty much we can say that it is not clear that the reason people are having lesser children, in whatever countries they're having lesser children, we cannot definitely say that that is antinatalism. And there is place to say that because antinatalist movement, if there is such a thing, is such a fringe movement, very less people know about David Benatar or any other philosophers. Even within antinatalist community, I doubt how many people have actually read books like Better Never to Have Been. So I would hazard a guess that it is not antinatalism or the ethical antinatalism that we are trying to advocate for, the reason for these reducing birth rates. And this is relevant because we will see later in the video how pronatalists like Stephen J. Shaw are really blaming wrong set of people. They need to distinguish, they need to look at the nuances of these antinatalist sentiments in the society. A while ago, if you know, Amanda and Mati published a book called Antinatalism, Extinction, and the End of Procreative Self-Corruption. It is published by Cambridge Elements. The good news is a physical edition is now out for anybody to buy it. You can see on the screen here Amanda talking about that physical edition in her own video. I'll put the link in the description to this video. It also has the links to the places where you can buy the book. So huge congratulations to Amanda and Mati again. Just a reminder, you can still access the soft copy of the book free. You can read it, but you can also buy a physical book if you like. A new book talking about extinction seems to have been released. The author is Ben Ware, and the title is On Extinction, Beginning Again at the End. Now, looking at the description of this book, it is for sure that it is talking about extinction. The title of the description is Philosophy at the End of the World, and it also says that extinction is the very lens through which we should examine our current reality. That much we can see. We can also see that the book is talking about beginning after extinction again, but it is not clear to me, just looking at the description, whether they are only talking about human extinction, extinction of all sentient beings, extinction of certain species. That is not entirely clear. And once that extinction happens, why does there have to be another beginning? What does that beginning mean? How will that beginning happen? Maybe all of these questions are answered in this book. So maybe this is an interesting book. It is like the ebook is for $8 and a hardback book is for about $20, as you can see on the screen. So yeah, new book on extinction. This is Nirmod. He is an antinatalist activist and he does street activism about antinatalism in Israel. You can see on the screen he's standing with a sign of antinatalism, I guess in Hebrew language. And the news is he is planning for a European tour. I like the name of the tour. It is Europe AN Tour. And it's going to start on 15th of April. He will be visiting 34 cities all over the Europe in a span of 45 days. Let's have a look at the schedule he is going to follow. So he starts with Spain in Madrid on 15th of April. Then Valencia, Barcelona, those are the cities in Spain. Then he goes to France, 3 cities in France. Then he goes to Belgium, then Netherlands, then Germany, a few cities in Germany, then Austria, Czech Republic, coming back to Germany on 8th of May, then Denmark, Sweden, Hungary, Slovenia, and finally ends in Italy, Bologna, Milano, and Rome on 29th of May. So if you happen to be in those cities on any of those days, I would urge you to join him in doing street activism, help him and support him. And also, if you are there and if you could host him for that particular night, it'll be a great help for him. Amanda has done a promotional video talking about this, and I'll put the link of that in the description. And Lawrence is also doing an interview specifically about this European tour of his. So big thank you to Nirmod for doing such an important job. It is very much needed. And also thank you to Amanda and Lawrence for promoting this activity. There is a magazine called The Drift Magazine, and on their website, thedriftmag.com, there was a new article published this week, An Unholy Alliance, by someone called Gabby Delvale. Now, I want to talk about this article because the author seems to understand the difference between philosophical antinatalism, like Bennettarian antinatalism, and people who don't have children for environmental reasons and call that environmental antinatalism. And in the article, they distinguish between them. They seem to understand quite clearly that these two things are different. Although at one point, the author calls David Bennettare a nihilist, which he is not. Bennettarian antinatalism is far from nihilism, but we can gloss over that small mistake. It also sort of in some way criticizes the pronatalist argument or pronatalist movement. It refers to the conference that happened, the pronatal conference that happened called Natal in Texas last year. It refers to that, and it also talks about different sentiments within that movement and in that conference, their anxiety towards immigration, their anxiety and fear that other people are going to outbreed you, and therefore we should promote pronatalism and all that. The article refers to that also. What I want to sort of respond to is a certain section in the article where it sort of amalgamates antinatalism and pronatalism and says that these two movements are useless. They don't really help us. So just want to talk about that. So let's see where it is. It says, neither the anti nor pronatalist traditions has much to offer those of us interested in improving the lives of already living, which I'm not sure if this is true, because if you follow the antinatalist argument and if you don't have children, then automatically you don't add competition for the resources to an already existing competition. At least the minimum that happens is this in case of antinatalism. Whereas in case of pronatalism, you are adding children to the already existing competition of resources and you're not helping there. That is main difference to the already living. And there are many other differences, of course. Many antinatalist people help already living people. Like there is effective altruism movement, and I know some people who are utilizing effective altruism principles in antinatalism movement. So that is also there. So this I don't think is true, but let's move on to see what else it says. Antinatalists are inclined to see human beings as vehicles or causes of suffering. That is not true. I mean, one of the main arguments for antinatalism is about suffering, and that includes human beings. In fact, there are many antinatalists who are human-centric antinatalists or anthropocentric antinatalists. So I'm not sure how it says that antinatalists are inclined to see human beings as vehicles. Maybe when we talk about extinction and population ethics, things like that, we might think of humans as one of the items in statistics. That might be the case, but the core arguments of antinatalism, this definitely is not true. While pronatalists regard them as numbers on balance sheet, and this I think is true, pawns in demographic contest, soldiers in racial and holy wars. That is true. Pronatalists want to bring new humans to serve their own agendas as a means to serve their own agendas. So human beings and their sentience and their capacity to suffer is not an end for them. It is a means to achieve some other ends. So what she's talking about, or he probably, what the author is talking about pronatalists is true, whereas what they're talking about antinatalists is not true. Conjuring fantasies of social collapse, anti and pronatalists alike deflect from the real horrors that world's children face. Again, how antinatalists are not considering the real horrors of the real children that exist today, I don't understand. I don't think this applies to antinatalists. While browsing the antinatalism hashtag on X, for instance, I came across posts chastising Palestinians for breeding exponentially in their harsh conditions. Now, this is true. There are some antinatalists, or there are some people who call themselves antinatalists, put an argument that only poor people should not have children, or only people in war-torn areas should not have children, and it is okay for rest of them to have children, maybe implying that it is okay for rest of them to have children. And that is not actually antinatalism. Antinatalism is against procreation of all beings. Now, while you say that, if you point out that, see, these are the conditions, these are the horrors that people face, and you point out the wars that are happening today, to make your argument, that is not saying that only those people should not have children. The only way to prevent human suffering in Gaza and elsewhere, apparently, is to stop creating human life altogether. I don't think that is the claim of antinatalism. There are solutions to the wars, there are solutions to the problems of existing humans. What antinatalism is saying is that if you don't have a problem in the first place, you don't have to find a solution. Instead of finding solutions to the problem, why not try and prevent problems from arising in the first place? And the way to do that is antinatalism. So this sentence needed some kind of qualification or clarification. Next, now and then I think about my hypothetical future children. I wonder what their names will be and whether they'll be interesting, kind, and if I accidentally raise little assholes, implying that antinatalists and pronatalists, which they talked about earlier, are little assholes, which I don't agree with for antinatalists. Will they visit my childhood home in Florida, or will the ocean have swallowed it up? This is implying the environmental argument. Will they play outside? Will they be able to breathe the air and to drink the water, like clean water? Okay, again, environmentalist sentiment. Should they even exist? Should they exist is quite an ambiguous question, because should they come into existence is what we are talking about when we are talking about antinatalism. Once they exist, should they exist? They should continue to exist. So that's a qualification there. Though antinatalist champions family planning and pronatalists claim to champion the family. Now, antinatalist championing family planning is ambiguous term, because many people who are for population control also are for family planning. So their theme is that maybe have some children, but don't have like 10 children, maybe have one child. So we gradually reduce the population to whatever number these people want the population of humans to be. But antinatalists are for family planning where we don't have any children at all. So that's a clarification. To protect it from corrosive influences of an increasingly selfish, atomized culture. Both these groups' anxieties stretch far beyond the home. Now, to protect from corrosive influences, you can argue for some antinatalists, but that is not the main argument. That you can say that today's world is not a good world to bring this child into existence. That could be some argument, but the main argument for antinatalism is anytime it is never okay or it is never good to bring a child into existence, whether today, whether 300 years ago, whether 300 years from now. Situations would be different, the degrees of suffering would be different, but serious suffering would still always exist. That is the main argument. And lastly, most of the time, starting a family is neither political nor ideological. It is easy to stereotype antinatalism as an ideology and say that starting a family is not ideological. But if you look at the arguments, then you can think, is it philosophical at least? Should we even question to have children? And if you think about the arguments, antinatalism arguments are quite logical. At least to me, they are quite convincing. But it's not ideological or political, but it is a bet on the future. And I think it is not a bet on the future, it is a bet on some sentient beings. It is a gamble you are playing with using sentient beings that you're going to bring into existence. And so I don't think the differences between antinatalists and pronatalists can be so easily extinguished. There were 3 noticeable videos this week. First was 84th episode of the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. Amanda was interviewing Carroll Wainwright this time. Carroll Wainwright is a YouTuber. He has a channel called The Falcon Reads where he reviews different books. But he has also written a book called The Unbearable Heaviness of Being. So this is a book on antinatalist theme, and so he's an author as well as a YouTuber. So I like the way Amanda calls him booktuber. Very interesting video, very interesting interview. The second one was a BBC documentary, The Darker Side of the Animal Kingdom, Bad Natured, and don't worry, it didn't have any like graphic details or graphic animal cruelty. It was narration by many different wildlife photographers, filmmakers, conservationists, veterinarians, talking about their experiences and observations in the wild and what cruel world that is. So different cinematographers, photographers tell their stories, and you get an idea of what cruel world that is, the wild world that is. Now, of course, it doesn't show any cruel photos or anything that you would get uncomfortable with. And these people are generally optimistic. They are not antinatalists themselves. So many a times during the documentary, they try to justify that cruelty. So, for example, in one of the stories where a tiger or a tiger cub was eating a deer alive, they tried to justify saying that, oh, that tiger cub was learning how to hunt, so he didn't know how to actually kill that deer before he started eating. So it was okay that he was eating the deer alive. So things like that are there. It's slightly frustrating from an antinatalist point of view, but it gives you an idea of what sort of world that is. What you see on the screen is what is called as cordyceps, which is a fungus which infects ants. In this case, you can see the ant is infected and it takes control of the brain of that ant, and the ant has to go through enormous amount of cruelty and suffering. That is just one example of this. This 1.5 hour documentary is full of these stories if you're interested in suffering of wild animals. Talking of suffering of wild animals, there was another video released by AntinatalistAdvocacy podcast, which is hosted by John Williams. And this time he was interviewing Human Hancock. Human Hancock is a vegan animal rights activist. He is actually a son of slaughterhouse workers. So that is interesting. But the great work that Human Hancock is doing is bringing to the light what is called as a vegan blind spot. That many animal rights activists, vegans, are concerned with suffering of farmed animals. People in general are concerned with suffering of companion animals, but everybody thinks that in nature things are good. Nobody thinks that wild animals are suffering. Wild animal suffering is an emerging field, and Human Hancock is doing an excellent job of drawing attention to that subject. That was the subject of this interview also. They talked about various aspects of wild animal suffering, and it was a lighter chat. They made sure that it didn't go, deep down the rabbit hole of any philosophical difficulties. But at the same time, they discuss some interesting points. So, for example, human extinction would be bad for suffering of wild animals because the suffering would still go on. So that is in contradiction to at least anthropocentric, human-centric antinatalism. So things like that, interesting things, they touched upon in a very lighter, in a very casual way. So it was enjoyable to listen to. So I'll put the link in the description of all of these 3 videos. A while ago, I had made a response video to someone called Aizel Mazard, who had made a video, Antinatalism is Evil. On that video, I got a comment asking some genuine questions about antinatalism. And I thought I should include them in the video itself. I could answer them while I'm making the video itself. Let's have a look at the comment. It says, "Nice video. This is my first real introduction to antinatalism, and I have a few questions. You're always welcome to ask questions." That is the whole point of doing all of this. So let's have a look at the questions. Do antinatalists feel that on the whole it would have been better if humanity had never existed? This depends on who you ask. There are some antinatalists who do feel that it would have been better had humanity not existed. Those are the antinatalists I call as human-centric or anthropocentric antinatalists. There are also some antinatalists who feel that it would have been better had no sentient beings had existed, had sentience not occurred on this earth or in this universe. Those are sentiocentric antinatalists. David Benatar is a famous antinatalist, an author and a philosopher, and he has written the book Better Never to Have Been, which mainly focuses on humans, but he is also of the opinion that it would have been better had no sentient beings existed. He is a sentiocentric antinatalist. So the answer to this question depends on who you ask, which antinatalist you ask. The second question is, how is the happiness of wanting and having children accounted for? So there are many things, there are many happinesses, there are many avenues of pleasure that before taking them, we do a calculus of what is the cost that we are paying to get them. So let's take an example of a situation where there is one-sided loving relationship. One person loves the other person, but that other person does not reciprocally have same feelings for this person. Now, most of us would agree that even though this loving person would be happy if they could establish a loving relationship with that person, it would not be right if they do it at the cost of crossing the boundary of consent of the other person. So that is one example, and you can stretch this to the extremes of forced sexual activity, sexual harassment, and so on. Another example would be ethical vegans. Most ethical vegans are not vegans because they do not like the taste of meat. In fact, they like meat, they like eating meat. That's why so many meat alternatives are coming up. But they don't want to fulfill their desires of eating meat. They don't want to get the happiness, the pleasure of eating meat at the cost of causing suffering to that animal, to other animals, because that suffering outweighs the happiness that they get from eating meat. That is another example. So the cost of happiness is important. So in this case also, the happiness of experiencing parenthood, the happiness and pleasure of having and raising children is not denied in antinatalist argument. What antinatalist argument is saying is that what are the costs that you're paying, the magnitude of harm that is caused to the being, the child who is going to be brought into existence, outweighs the pleasures that the parents are going to get the happiness from that parenthood. That's one. And also the cost is being paid by somebody else and the pleasure is enjoyed by someone else. The cost is to that being who is going to be brought into existence for the pleasure of the existing parents. That is the calculus antinatalism is talking about. So happiness of wanting and having children are definitely accounted for in antinatalist arguments. There is also another workaround here, and this is a very dependent workaround. which is adoption. It works such a way that if you want to experience parenthood and have the happiness, adopt an already existing child. Now, this will only work as long as there are orphans in this world. If a world where there are no orphans, this argument won't work. But in our current real world, there are many, many millions of orphans who are in need of homes. So why not help an existing child rather than creating a new child? That is a workaround of adoption, which is generally suggested in antinatalism. Next is if a life could not be continued without suffering. So by that, what I think he means is if a life could be ended painlessly. So it could be either painless physical pain or mental pain or both. But let's imagine a scenario where a person dies in their sleep without any physical pain, without any mental pain, without any fear, anxiety, nothing. They don't even know that they're dying. They just die in their sleep. That is a scenario. Let's consider that for the scope of this question. Would it be morally any different than a life not began? And I think there are two parts to this question. One is, even though that person died in their sleep completely painlessly, whatever lifespan they would have lived, that would have definitely involved some degree of serious suffering. And that would have not occurred had that life not started in the first place. That is part number one. Second part is that once that person had come into existence, they would have developed some interests and preferences to the future about continuing their life. These preferences and interests are frustrated by their sudden death, by them ceasing to exist. Some philosophers have argued that those preference frustration is also a harm to that person. David Benatar has argued that in his book, The Human Predicament. I will include the link to that book in the description. The next question is, how is the value of suffering compared to that of not suffering and to that of pleasure? So I think we're talking about scales here. Suffering has serious negative intrinsic value. And I'm not talking about some instrumental suffering like going to gym and feeling pain so that you can achieve some gains out of it. I'm talking about intrinsic value of suffering like cancer, like wars, which are serious intrinsic negative experiences. That suffering has negative value. Not suffering could be a state, but that is neutral. And to that of pleasure. Now, my understanding is most of the pleasures, barring a few exceptions, are negation of some kind of suffering. So, for example, to enjoy some pleasure, you need to have a desire to do whatever activity that gives you pleasure. And if you don't do that, then you're deprived because of that desire, because of that unfulfilled desire. And that deprivation causes suffering. In order to prevent or quench that deprivation and prevent the suffering, you do that activity and as a result enjoy the pleasure out of that. So most of the pleasures are just negation of suffering, and therefore they are not intrinsically positive experiences. They don't have intrinsic positive value, is my understanding. There would be some exceptions like surprising pleasures, like you didn't expect some pleasure to happen, but then all of a sudden that happened. But those are minority in most of the cases. That is what I think. The next question is same as D, the question we just looked at about scales of suffering and pleasure, but except about potential suffering versus potential being and potential pleasures. Now, I can talk about this at length, but this will take an hour. So instead, what I would suggest is look up David Benatar's asymmetry. That compares the presence and absence of pleasures and pains of existing people to the presence and absence of potential pleasures and potential pains of potential beings who would come into existence. And pains and pleasures here are exemplars of harms and benefits of life. This is explained in detail in his book Better Never to Have Been, and I will include the link to that book also in the description. Stephen J. Shaw, as you can see on the screen, that is his photo. He is a data scientist, a filmmaker, and creator of the documentary Birthgap. I have seen only first part of the Birthgap because that is the only part which is free, and it looks like the main point of the documentary is that many people around the world want to have kids, but by the time they realize they should have kids, it is far too late for them to have them, and therefore they end up being childless. This he calls as unplanned childlessness, and because the fertility window for women is shorter than that is for men, The main focus of the documentary is on women, even though he cautions that this unplanned childlessness affects men equally as women. Now, you might say that this is about childlessness. This is about people who want to have kids but can't or don't have kids for some reason. What has that to do with antinatalism? It is not even about child freeness. Technically, this is true, but I'm going to point out two places where this relates to antinatalism. Stephen J. Shaw goes around the world advising different governments to have pro-natalist policies, which is in stark contradiction to any antinatalist policies by definition. He was in Hungary last week, and of course, Hungary is an authoritarian government which has many pro-natalist policies. Viktor Orban is their prime minister. I have made a video in the past explaining how Hungary spends more on incentivizing people, encouraging people to have children in terms of percentage of their GDP compared to what America spends on defense and military in terms of percentage of their GDP. So Hungary is incentivizing people on like a war footing. It's like a war against antinatalism. And Stephen J. Shaw was in Hungary, so they're going to love him there. There is a website, not surprisingly, called hungarianconservative.com, as you can see on the screen. And they have published an interview of Stephen J. Shaw. In that interview, they talk about antinatalism. He specifically says that anybody who encourages people to have fewer children than they want is, in my definition, an antinatalist. So he's clubbing many different flavors of antinatalism together. It's convenient for him to do that. What sort of flavors had he looked at? He starts describing Malthusian antinatalism. So Thomas Malthus, if you don't know, was an 18th century economist who proposed that if we just keep on having children and increasing the human population, eventually we would run out of resources. Now, that never happened because as the populations grew, we also advanced in technology. We had industrial revolution. So we figured out a way to cultivate more resources for ourselves. Now we have more crops, we have more food to feed everybody. So what Malthus had estimated did not exactly happen in that way. So that falsehood is leveraged by many of these pro-natalists to prove that, to attack anti-natalists, to prove that, see, antinatalism is wrong. This is a kind of fallacy of fallacy, to use a fallacy of using fallacy to prove your point. But then he also talks about environmentalism, and then he says that recently it is blamed on patriarchy that women are not having many children. So he says that antinatalism is being morphed from one phase to another over the years. He talks all of that, but he never goes anywhere near to the core arguments of antinatalism. We'll see why that is. But he also says antinatalists are liars. He says they are even liars. And I'm going to now show you who exactly is lying. Further down in the interview, he says that he talks about some people. He says that there are some people whom I call extinctionists because all they ever talk about is having fewer children. And he says that these people don't openly talk about extinction, but there are some who come out openly and say we don't want any more pain or suffering. Now, this tells me that Stephen J. Shaw has looked up antinatalism. First of all, if you know the term antinatalism, you are working in this area about procreation, pronatalism, fertility rates, birth gap, all of that. You definitely have looked up antinatalism, and you have looked up the arguments for antinatalism if you're talking about pain and suffering. So if you know these arguments but you don't touch them when stereotyping antinatalists into one bunch, into one bracket, about Malthusianism, environmentalism, and all that, but you don't go near the core antinatalist argument, I think there is, we can say, some extent of dishonesty there. So that is one part. That is how it relates to antinatalism. The second part it relates to antinatalism is that these are genuinely childless people and they need help. They are suffering, you can say, because they have unfulfilled desires to have children. And you could argue, do we have a duty to help those people? Even if you say that we have a duty to help those people, we need to look at in what sort of help we should be providing. What sort of help does come under that realm of duty to help them? One way to help them would be to spread awareness among these people that having children is not be all and end all of life. You can have a very meaningful and fulfilling life even without having children and help these people live a happy life, existing people. That could be one way. That is not the way people like Stephen J. Shaw are doing. They want to incentivize these people to have more children, and they want to spread awareness among these people that prioritize having people against having career and having jobs and so on. So what he's saying is people should first have children in their early or maybe late 20s and then focus on career. And because the fertility window of women is so short, the focus is more again on women, that women should have children first and then think about career, then think about education. This is the narrative that people like Stephen J. Shaw actually are promoting. Now, in this, they are claiming to help these existing people against their suffering of unfulfilled desires of having kids. But in at what cost? The cost is they're creating new people, they're creating new suffering beings who would also have needs like this and who would eventually suffer in life. And that is a line where antinatalism should be drawn, that we should help the existing people but not at the cost of creating new people. That is where this relates to antinatalism in second way. Now, I'm going to take a leap and say this without any evidence, that people like these, Stephen J. Shaw, Jordan Peterson, Elon Musk, they are doing this under the guise of helping childless people or helping unplanned childlessness, as they call. But their main intention is not just helping these people, but to have more and more humans for whatever ends they themselves have. So this is then becomes sort of a propaganda. And I want to be very clear that I'm saying this without any evidence with me, but this is what I'm guessing.